Good morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning service. So good to see you all. I want to thank Bill Salmon for being our liturgist this morning, and Harriet Busick for bringing our refreshments, and Diane Salmon for helping out, and of course Holly Thompson for being our deacon to the diaspora. At this point in the service, I invite all who are able to please stand and join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation for such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Let us join together in singing our opening hymn, which is one of the inserts this morning. You are salt for the earth, O people. Please be seated. At this point in the service, I invite us all to join together in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation. I invite you to take this time to center your hearts, your minds, your bodies, and your spirits into this here and now that we share with one another. After a little bit of time and silence has gone by, I'll play a short musical meditation this morning written by Tchaikovsky entitled Morning Prayer. Let us join together in silent meditation. Our gospel lesson today from Mark chapter 5 is 2 healing stories. And one story begins, but then before it reaches its conclusion, another story gets told. And that second story concludes. And then we go back to hear the conclusion of the first story. So it's kind of like a story sandwiched within a story. And when this happens, I think it's clear that the stories are meant to connect to one another and help us interpret the other story. It's a relational thing going on between these two stories. The first story involves a person named Jairus, who is the leader of a local synagogue, and his 12-year-old daughter is ill and near death. The second story is about an unnamed woman who has suffered from a flow of blood for 12 years. Now, I hope you already notice one important connection, the number 12 in both stories. And for a Jewish audience, it would immediately have brought to mind the 12 tribes of Israel, maybe even some other associations, but certainly that one. So while these stories may seem to be about two individuals in need of healing, let's be open to the possibility that they're also about the needs of the community for healing and wholeness.
Our reading this morning is from Mark 5:21 through 43. Once Jesus crossed over again to the other shore, a large crowd gathered in front of him, so he stayed beside the sea. And there came to him one of the synagogue leaders, whose name was Jairus. When this man saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded with him fervently, saying, "My little daughter is on the verge of death, so will you come and lay your hands on her? Then she'll be cured and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him, pushing up hard against him. Now there was a woman who had been afflicted with a flow of blood for 12 years. She'd suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and spent everything she had, but found no relief. Instead, she had gotten worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, telling herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I'll be cured." And right away, the spring of her blood dried up, and she sensed in her body that she had been healed of her scourge. But right away, Jesus clearly sensed in himself that power was going out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his students said to him, "You see this crowd pushing against you so hard, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he went on looking around to see which female had done this thing. But the woman, terrified and shaking, and knowing what had happened to her, came and threw herself at his feet and told him the whole truth. But he said to her, "Daughter, your trust has cured you. Be on your way in peace and be healthy after your scourge." While he was still speaking, people came from the house of the synagogue leader and said, "Your daughter has died. Why are you still bothering the teacher?" But Jesus overheard the news being told, and he said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only trust." And he didn't allow anyone to come along with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the leader's house, and he observed an uproar with people crying, wailing loudly. Going in, he said, "Why are you making this uproar? Why are you crying? The child hasn't died, she's just asleep." They jeered at him, but he threw out everybody, took the child's father and mother and his companion with him, and made his way in to where the child was. Then he took hold of the child's hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which translates as, "Little girl, I'm telling you, get up." And right away, the little girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. Then they were stunned almost beyond their capacity to be stunned. And he gave strict orders to them that no one was to know what had happened here. And he told them she must be given something to eat. Thus ends the reading.
Well, thanks to Bill for reading what I think is the longest reading in the lectionary, period. Let's join together in singing the hymn, Children of the Rainbow Promise. The words are in one of the inserts this morning, and I hope you will all recognize this melody. I'll play it for you. Well, I think it's rather obvious to begin by stating today the Christian church is changing. The church has always had a reputation for being, quote, a bit slow out the gate. They say that in the church, if you're a decade or two behind the times, you're a progressive. Recently, just a few months ago, the United Methodist Church, for the first time in its 204-year history, voted to end the practice of banning gay clergy in the Methodist Church and to stop banning the celebration of same-sex weddings. This is a welcome change, and just in time for this year's Pride celebration. And in times of change, which can be both hopeful for some and troubling for others, I find it helps to look back over our history. And since yesterday was the Pride celebration in Monterey, indeed the last weekend of June throughout the world is one of the major celebrations. Let's look at the history of Pride in America. Did you know that the first Pride Parade celebration was held in 1970 in New York and in Los Angeles and in Chicago? And this was 1 year after the Stonewall Uprising, which is just the most well-known of several uprisings for gay and lesbian rights. The first Pride event in Monterey County, however, wouldn't be until 1993. But in 1993, it was not an open public event as it is today, held on the streets. It was an event hosted in a gay bar in Monterey called the After Dark that no longer exists. It wouldn't be until 2007 when the first Pride Parade would take place in Monterey County. Does anyone know what city that was in? Salinas. 10 years after that, Monterey Peninsula Pride Parade took place in Seaside. And then 2 years after that, in 2019, the parade moved to the city of Monterey, where it is to this day. But back in 1972, just 3 years after Stonewall, the first openly gay man was ordained into Christian ministry by the United Church of Christ in San Carlos, California. And that was Bill Johnson. Reverend Johnson would go on to organize the United Church Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Concerns, a national organization working for justice and equality within the UCC and within society. In 1972, when this happened, when Bill was ordained, I was just beginning junior high school and had no idea what was going on. It wasn't until 1983 when I entered seminary. And I had felt at that time for a year or two a calling into ministry. And I was at that time most at home spiritually in the United Methodist Church. When I was a child, I was baptized in a United Methodist Church. But the United Methodist Church at that time had already very publicly decided that they would not ordain or support openly gay clergy in the UMC. So when I got to Minneapolis, to seminary, it was a time to explore denominations. And I knew nothing about the UCC, but they were already on record for being progressive and the most welcoming place for gay and lesbian people. So I ended up going to several UCC churches and finding this one church in Robbinsdale called Robbinsdale United Church of Christ, where I joined the church while I was a student at seminary. One of the requirements to enter into ordained ministry is to get the support and the backing of your home congregation. So Robbinsdale was now my home congregation. And I had a meeting with the two ministers of the church to explain the situation that I was going through the ordination process as an openly gay man. And they were very supportive, but told me right away, Rick, we've got to figure out a good strategy. Because we needed the church support and recommendation. And they were well aware of a member of the church named John, who was a pillar of the church. John was the type of person that whenever there was a vote of the congregation to be made, half of the church looked to see what he would say. And then they went along with that. Very influential member of this church. I was also told by the ministers that there had been, a few years earlier, a gay couple that had started coming to the church, and that John had driven them out by very loudly, within earshot of the couple, saying very derogatory jokes about gay people. That couple left and never came back. So we were concerned about how this was all going to happen. And part of the strategy we developed was that even though I was a student at seminary and working at another church and doing all my studies, I was to join the deacons. John happened to be a member of the deacons. And after myself being a member of the deacons, I was to volunteer to be the chair of the deacons. All of this was just to build a relationship with John so that he knew me. At this point, I had not come out to him or to the whole congregation. And then, as it got close to my going through the final steps of being approved for ordination, we got to the church vote. And that morning that the church was going to take a vote after the service, I had been invited to preach. And it was planned that that would be my coming out to the whole congregation. I'd already come out to certain individuals there, but now this was public knowledge. And after I had preached the sermon, I sat down. One of the other ministers came up and led the congregation in a time of prayer, as we do, joys and concerns. And John was the first man to raise his hand and to speak. And he said a prayer of blessing for me in my journey into ministry. And you can tell I'm still moved to this day, just remembering that transformation in him. And the vote of the congregation, I think, was either unanimous or pretty darn close to unanimous to approve me for ordination. The church, for me, that church, was not only a place where I went to worship, and in worship to open myself to the mystery of God and the transformation possible by being part of a spiritual community. But it was a place that was transformative for the community, not just the church community, but the wider community of Robbinsdale, Minnesota. This is just one of the important aspects about progressive churches today. They are a place in which transformation can take place because they are spiritual communities where we find ourselves in dialogue, in relationship with folks of differing but kindred minds. People that do not disagree with everything we believe. And in that relationship that is fostered in a spiritual community like a church, we join together in times of intentional reflection on life, our lives, on culture, the wider culture around us, on events in society, and many other things of importance. And in that process of reflecting, we give attention to the transcendent that which we use the name God to describe, that source of creativity, the power to evolve, to grow, to transform, a mystery beyond all mysteries, the love that is what is important in life. In Mark's time, in the first century of the Common Era, it was a time, especially for those who were not in the top 5% of the hierarchy. It was a time of great trauma, injustice, upheaval, calamity, and loss. And I believe that through his gospel, through the stories Mark told, he was trying to give people a lifeboat, a refuge for those who were most vulnerable during a difficult and dangerous time. And today we have two stories about healing and restoration, which I believe is not just the healing and the restoration of an individual, but of the community. In the first story, there is a 12-year-old girl near death. Is she dead? Is she asleep? Is she unconscious? She's the daughter of a leader of the religious community, Jairus. As a child and as a female child, she is at the bottom of the social hierarchy of their society, the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable. In that time and place, peasant society was in free fall. It was literally near death under Roman colonial rule. And Jesus told Jairus, whose daughter was near death, perhaps whose community was near death, don't be afraid. We still need to live by trust. And then Jesus touched her. She woke up. They lived. The second story, about an unknown woman with a flow of blood, hemorrhaging for 12 years. An illness that, even though she went to all the doctors, no one could cure. I imagine she must have lost a lot of money paying for treatments that didn't work. She was hemorrhaging economically as well as physically. A hemorrhage is a profuse, uncontrollable bleeding or loss of blood. And it's often used as a metaphor for economic bleeding, when the poor, the vulnerable, suffer, as they are doing in Gaza today, as 2,000 years ago they did in Roman-occupied Palestine. And in this second story, Jesus is passive. He doesn't do anything. The woman is the agent of her own healing. She reaches out and touches him. All Jesus does is notice and then calls her daughter. Remember, the first story is about a daughter. And Jesus says it was her trust that had cured her. Isn't that interesting? Jesus, knowing that power was taken from him, is not claiming that that's what healed her. He's actually saying it wasn't. Was it her reaching out? Her trust, her risk, her courage. When I think about these stories and think about the community, two things stand out. the importance of touch in community. Didn't we all feel it in our bones during COVID when we were in lockdown? How wonderful it was to join in on Zoom. And as wonderful as it was, how unsatisfactory compared to face, side by side, close enough to reach out and touch. Touch is about connection, about expressing support, about nurture and comfort. And it is as important to our physical, mental, and spiritual health as a good diet and exercise. And then the second commonality, common themes within these two stories and many others in the gospel, trust, which is the heart of faith. It is confidence. It is reliance upon, especially when you're vulnerable, and people whom you've relied upon in the past have let you down. It is to trust in one another. The loaves and fishes story, where a multitude is fed because people learned how to share with one another. It is trust, not just in a quote-unquote Superman, a hero, a savior like Jesus, but trust in the community that is gathered around the values and the teachings that he taught. In these stories, the microcosm of the individual is a representation of the communal macrocosm. And when we worry about the state of the church today, and there is much to worry about, I think we need to remember why we are what we are. For me, it has to do with the transforming, restoring, liberating, and healing work that progressive spiritual communities have accomplished down through the centuries. We are the beneficiaries of the love and the trust and the courage of thousands. Compassionate, progressive congregations may not be able to change the whole world, but they are able and do make a difference. The church has transformed society. It has also at times resisted transformation when it was needed. But I cannot imagine a fully functional society without the type of unique spiritual community that exemplifies most of the churches I have been involved with. And I think that is why I was never able to give up on the church. I want to close with a poem by Muriel Rukeyser. She was a poet, playwright, biographer, children's book author, and a political activist. She was also an important figurehead for feminist poets and activists in the 1960s and 1970s. She mentored scores of younger poets, including Alice Walker, Anne Sexton, Sharon Olds, and Adrienne Rich, among many others. She was born in 1913, died in 1980. And this is an excerpt from one of her poems titled Elegy in Joy. Rukeyser writes, "We tell beginnings for the flesh and the answer or the look, the lake in the eye that knows, for the despair that flows down in widest rivers, cloud of home, and also the green tree of grace, all in the leaf, in the love that gives us ourselves. The word of nourishment passes through the women, soldiers, and orchards, rooted in constellations, white towers, eyes of children, saying in time of war, what shall we feed? I cannot say the end. Nourish beginnings. Let us nourish beginnings. Not all things are blessed, but the seeds of all things are blessed. The blessing is in the seed. This moment, the seed, this wave of the sea, this look, this instant of love. Years over wars and an imagining of peace, or the expiation journey toward peace, which is many wishes flaming together, fierce, pure life, the many living home. Love that gives us ourselves in the world known to all. New techniques for the healing of the wound and the unknown world. One life or the faring stars.
Please give in the spirit of joy and generosity as you are able. Join me in the blessing of our gifts. O God, through the offering of these gifts, may we become a more open people, open-minded in hearing the word and wisdom, open-hearted in healing a broken world, open-handed in heeding your call for charity and in active love. With the thanks for all good gifts, we present a portion of our substance and the whole of ourselves. Amen.
Please be seated. At this point in the service, I invite us all into a time of sharing our joys and our concerns with the community. If there's anything you'd like to share, please get my attention. I'll bring the microphone to you. And if there's any way in which we might respond in solidarity, let us know. I want to share just a few concerns and joys. First, I talked to Ken and Faye Morley's granddaughter yesterday. No, daughter, sorry, Kara. And Ken is back at the retirement community where he and Faye live, but he's not back in the apartment yet. He's in a special care facility as he recovers from an infection. Still a little bit of a mystery exactly what it was, but he is gradually getting better. So that's the good news. But let's keep Ken and Faye in our thoughts and our prayers for Ken's ongoing recovery and restoration. God, hear our prayers. I also have been in contact with Elizabeth Carlson, and Bud is out of Stanford now and in a place nearby where he can recuperate. And at some point, he'll be back here in Monterey at a care facility. But right now, he's close to Stanford, so they can keep a good eye on him. So let's keep Bud and his recovery in our thoughts and prayers. God, hear our prayers. Is there anything folks have to share today? Diane.
I just want to thank God for our wonderful pastor and that wonderful sermon today, and you sharing your beginnings. That was just so special to me, and thank you so much for that. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Jody.
I think that's just a wonderful sharing on your part, and the way that you wove it into our history and remembering, and crowning it off with Song of the Soul, which reminds me of all the women's music that we were into in the 70s.
Right.
So thank you very much. We love you.
Thanks, Jody. Love you too. Lamont.
A couple of things to give thanks for. Number one, I agree with everyone who's spoken. This morning was the reason why I don't give up on the church. So bless you.
Thanks.
I love that proto-feminist gospel, because that's what it is. Both of our most recent book club books have been on From Jesus to Christianity, on the gender-bending openness of the early Christian communities. And then the last book with Jacob Wright's Why the Bible Began, the same thing. It's amazing how all those work together like that. And then the third is a concern, but a joyful concern. In today's Herald is an article about cutting back scholarships at Cal State Monterey due to budget crunches. And there's a ministry there for us. I don't know what it is, but you know what I mean?
There's a seed.
There's something going on there there's a seed going on. So thanks be to God for moments like this.
Thanks be to God for moments like this. If there's nothing else that folks wish to share at this point, I invite us all into a few moments of silent prayer together. After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite you to join together in this new paraphrased version of the prayer that Jesus taught us. Let us join together now in silent prayer. Gracious Spirit, as difficult as it is, help us to awaken to the opportunities of our time. Help us to have the courage that that unknown woman had when she reached out to touch, trusting that in that reaching out there was wholeness and healing. May we be a community that reaches out, that connects, that trusts, and that waters the seeds of hope and transformation that are within our reach. Hear us now as we say this new version of that ancient prayer that our brother Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Eternal Spirit, Earth Maker, Pain Bearer, Life Giver, Source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven, the hallowing of your name shall echo through the universe. The way of your justice be followed by the peoples of the earth. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hurts we absorb from one another, forgive us. In times of temptation and test, strengthen us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. This is a time for any announcements that folks have to make. There are two in the bulletin. This Tuesday evening, there will be a meditation service at 7 p.m., and there will be a link to that going out on Tuesday afternoon. And on Friday, we have our iHelp dinner. And I think everything is covered. Everything's covered. So thank you for all who are helping to support the homeless by providing dinner this coming Friday. Are there any other announcements that folks have to make? Well then, I invite all who are able to stand and join in singing our closing hymn. It is the final insert or song sheet in your bulletin this morning. My life flows on in endless song. May you go forth this day in peace and in power. The power to move through transformations to transformations. The courage to trust you, we, all will be well. The courage to keep on singing. Go forth this day in peace. Amen.